Hey, welcome to Crushing Comics. I am your host, Peter, and I'm here to fall in love with my comic book collection all over again. I got cut off a little bit early last episode because it turns out that, if you can hear some thumping above us, this recording studio is not the secure bunker I might like it to be. So I didn't get to talk about the last book in the bundle I unwrapped, and it's an unusual one, so I think I'm going to tackle it just standalone in this episode. It's GiantSize XMen is the name of the book. Now, we all know GiantSize XMen as the X-Men book that brought the X-Men back, right? It was the book where we got introduced to Storm and Colossus and Nightcrawler, where Wolverine, Sunfire, and Banshee joined the team with Krakoa, the island, and all of that. And that is in this book. But this was celebrating the anniversary, the 40th anniversary of that coming out. It came out in 2015. And it's like, well, what else do you put in a book that has GiantSize X-Men in it? And so Marvel, first of all, put two other GiantSize X-Men's in this, GiantSize X-Men 3 and 4, which are actually modern GiantSize issues. Unlike some of the other Marvel titles that had GiantSize books, like Avengers or Defenders, Spider-Man, X-Men just really had the one. The second GiantSize X-Men was just a reprint book. But then Marvel has occasionally revised or revived GiantSize X-Men, as they did in the 2000s when it contributed additional issues to GiantSize X-Men that were written by Joss Whedon and Claremont. And they had kind of throwbacky stories in them. And they hadn't actually been collected because they didn't fit in with Whedon's Astonishing and they were kind of just on their own. And so Marvel saw the chance to put them in here. So great, now we've got 3 GiantSize X-Men comic books. Wow, so this is from the, I'm just going to take the cover off, from the wrapped hardcover era of X-Men. And of Marvel omnibuses in general. That's pretty cool. So now Marvel has 3 GiantSize issues, and they're like, well, what else are we going to put in there? So they also put in elements of Classic X-Men 1. Classic X-Men, of course, was a reprint series, which was offering a way for people to get into the X-Men comic books that they had missed from the 70s and 80s by rerunning them in a straight series of reprints. But Claremont was doing this interesting thing where he actually was inserting some additional scenes into those comics and then also doing a backup feature in every issue. So there was still a reason to buy them, which is pretty interesting. And actually, in just a few weeks, Marvel is about to release a whole Classic X-Men omnibus, which is going to be really weird because they're not going to put in all the original stories that Classic X-Men covered, but they are going to put in the inserted pages and the backup stories. So it's going to be like a DVD bonus feature omnibus. Very strange. But what is here is 2 tales from the first issue of Classic X-Men that basically were kind of fit around GiantSize, which of course Claremont didn't write GiantSize. It was the only book in that revised X-Men run that he didn't run. So this was the chance for him to insert some Claremont-isms. And also fantastic artwork. John Bolton, who Claremont actually has an indie book with called Black Dragon, which is somewhere on my shelf here. I don't know if I could find it quickly enough to talk about, but it's somewhere down here. But he's a fantastic artist. So, okay, now we're up to like 3.5 comics, 4 comics. So what else does Marvel decide to put in here? Well, they shoehorn in X-Men Origins Colossus and X-Men Origins Wolverine, which we just were looking at a couple issues ago. It throws in 2 issues of What If, some materials from the modern X-Men Gold, which is like one of these, when they put out these anthology issues where they're like, tons of creators in this cool special issue. As a collector of stuff in physical format, you're always like, oh god. Because those books do not tend to get collected well. They either like totally get missed, or they get their stories all split up and put into separate places, and they're really become a pain to account for in your collection. But, so not all of X-Men Gold is in this, just some of the stories. But here's what's in this that for a while was very attractive, and then still is attractive depending on what your collection looks like on the shelf. This has the 6-issue X-Men Deadly Genesis miniseries, which was written by Ed Brubaker. Deadly Genesis follows up on the long gestating hint that there might be a 3rd Summers brother, which was first dropped, I want to say, by Scott Lobdell in the 90s. It was kind of like one of these pervasive, like, underneath threads in the X-Men books for a while, and had never really been followed up upon. So finally, Marvel and X-Men editorial said, let's take a stab at that. And it is a blockbuster story. It does some crazy things to the X-Men's continuity. It inserts a whole extra element of story into GiantSize XMen #1 that tracks really well as a retcon. I like it. It makes sense. It's interesting, but it's part of a trend of casting Professor Xavier as kind of this very Machiavellian, almost villain that happened in the 2000s. Maybe that's a natural outgrowth of addressing that character. Like, how do you have this guy that's so benevolent and does so many good things for mutants and, like, kind of is always good, which is the way that he had been written a lot of the time? Like, that starts to evaporate, and we get to see a lot of his ulterior motives, and that sometimes he wasn't always right. I always think about, like, you watch an action movie and the star is the person who makes it through all the set pieces. They don't fall off the cliff. They don't get crushed by the rolling over truck. They don't get shot by the bullets. And that's, like, just one example of a person out of maybe hundreds of people who are trying to do good or survive in that situation that died. And the X-Men story has always been about the survivors. Some tragic things have happened to the X-Men, even under Professor X's watch. But generally it's been a story about people surviving and persisting, and surviving being hated and feared. And Deadly Genesis imagines, like, what if not everybody survived? And what if Professor X kind of just edited that, you know, conveniently off screen so that we didn't have to know about it and didn't have to think about it, and the other X-Men didn't have to worry about the tragedy that entailed. So it's a heavy story. It's a retcon, which I am not always for or against. I'm willing to evaluate everyone as they come, and in this sense, I think they did a great job, and they really actually added something to the X-Men. But because it brings back this third Summers brother, it sets up what will become a portion of the X-Men peeling off and going to space in the Rise and Fall of Shi'ar Empire, which happens in Uncanny X-Men directly following this, also written by Ed Brubaker, and then turns into the War of Kings saga, which is one of Marvel's best cosmic sagas, and it is kind of the next cosmic chapter after the Annihilation, Conquest, and Annihilation stories. So here's the thing. If you're somebody who's going to own every omnibus and you just want them no matter what, or if you're not an X-Men fan and you just want to get that material in oversized, you don't need this book, because you're going to get GiantSize X-Men when you buy Uncanny X-Men 1 omnibus, and those other kind of in-betweener issues don't really matter to you. And then you're going to get the Deadly Genesis stuff as you buy the trio of omnibuses that go with War of Kings, because it's part of that War of Kings story. But if you're an X-Men fan and you don't plan to buy the War of Kings omnibus set because you just really care about, like, the core X-Men parts of the story, or because you just are going to get the standalone War of Kings OHC and you don't want, like, the whole Inhumans half of that run-up, then this is your only way to get an oversized version of Deadly Genesis. And that's why I bought it originally. There was no hint that we were going to get this amazingly, perfectly comprehensive War of Kings omnibus trio of books down the line. And so I saw this and I was like, well, this is the chance to have Deadly Genesis oversized so that you could have a shelf that goes Deadly Genesis, and then Rise and Fall of Shi'ar Empire, and then War of Kings, which makes a lot of sense, even though there's some things that are in the middle that had never been oversized before, like X-Men Kingbreaker, which did get collected into those War of Kings omnibuses. So that's why it's in this book, because it does have a strong connection to GiantSize X-Men, and that's why this book at the time was really attractive to buy. Should you buy it now? If you're getting an X-Men bookshelf and you're going to have the X-Men omnibuses, I would say maybe, because it adds those other two giant-size issues, and there's no other way to get them. But Deadly Genesis right now, even though it's part of a line of stories that continue through Rise and Fall and War of Kings, doesn't have any other connective tissue and oversized before it. It comes sometime after the Grant Morrison run that's in New X-Men Omnibus. It's kind of during the Joss Whedon run on Astonishing X-Men, but there's nothing to come, like, directly before Deadly Genesis on a shelf in oversize. So if you're really focusing on a modern X-Men collection, right now there's no reason that you're going to need this. I do suspect that if we ever get that period of X-Men in hardcover, oversized hardcover, which I can't imagine why, but I actually like the preceding period of Uncanny X-Men. It's written by Chris Claremont, and a lot of people don't like it. I thought it was good. But you wouldn't put this with that, and you probably wouldn't put Rise and Fall with that either. So if you're ever going to get that in oversized hardcover, gosh, is this getting confusing enough for you? You will need this to follow it. But then if you want to follow this, you have to get Rise and Fall, which is its own hardcover. The point is you probably can get this super on sale at this point, so why not? If you're the X-Men collector. If you're more of the general omnibus collector, skip it. Oh my gosh, I hope I didn't tie you in a rhetorical knot there. But that's why I wanted to leave this for its own episode, not only because it was noisy in the house, but because there was a lot to say to explain this book. So, now for the ceremonial shelving. Gosh, I don't even know where to put it, because it's like spans so many times. I guess I'm just going to put it with the other X-Men stuff, and there's a lot of organization that happens between episodes. So, GiantSize XMen, ceremonial shelving. I'm going to put it right here. Tune in next time as I continue to unwrap bricks of comic books. Which side are they on? This side. Bricks of comic books. Unfurl them and tell you what I know about them, if anything. This has been Crushing Comics. Thank you so much for watching.